Now, Washington Mornings on the Mall. At AM 630.
Happy Monday to you, 7:07. Brian Neiman, Brian Wilson with you. Got Carrie Pickett from the Washington Times coming up, but in Chicago this week for the NATO Summit, so we'll talk to her a half hour from now. Right now, though, on the phone, Joe DIGENOVA, our legal expert. Good morning, Joe.
Good morning, Brian.
So I know you've done a lot of time before juries in your life. I found it interesting in the Roger Clemens trial that jurors were apparently falling asleep. How big of a deal is that, and does it happen, quite frankly, a lot?
It happens a lot. Judges generally warn the particular juror, sometimes in the presence of the other jurors. If they're warned, sometimes they're warned privately. But if a juror is consistently doing it, and many jurors, some people just have a problem sitting for long periods of time, they just can't stay awake, they are excused. There's no way you can have someone like that sitting on a jury because they're not hearing the evidence. And that's their job, is to hear the evidence. So judges are pretty strict about that. They tend to let the sleepers stay on more than they should. Generally, sleepers should be gotten rid of almost immediately when there's any indication they can't stay awake.
Is it grounds for mistrial?
Only if the defense, chooses to make it so. Most of the time, people who are that far into a trial, like the Clemens trial, want to go forward, even if they go ahead with fewer than 12 jurors, which you can do by the consent of both parties. It can be grounds for mistrial.
I'd imagine then that's the way to get out of jury duty, is just to kind of fall asleep.
Or to suggest that you are a sleepwalker, things like that. But it's really unfortunate after something as serious as some cases. I don't consider the Clemens trial to be serious, but certainly has been a serious waste of time and resources, but we're there, so we'll see what happens. All
right, new details came out on Thursday and Friday on the Trayvon Martin, George Zimmerman case.
Yes.
Probably nothing really shocking. I mean, Zimmerman has said since day one, and there is evidence beforehand that he had injuries.
Yes.
Had that fractured nose, broken nose, black eyes, and some cuts in the back of his head. There were injuries to Trayvon's knuckles, obviously showing that there was a fight. Apparently, it was from intermediate range where the shot took place. What did you take from this evidence that was released last week?
Well, I took from it something that wasn't talked about very much, which was the videotape of him at the 7-Eleven. 6'2", bruising young man, much larger than George Zimmerman. Something that no one on the prosecution team wanted to talk about.
Although I thought the autopsy report had him at 6 foot 160.
Whatever it was, he was a lot bigger than George Zimmerman.
Big kid.
6 foot. I mean, 6 foot 160. Fine. Nonetheless, big kid. Strapping, perfectly capable of the assault on George Zimmerman, and apparently it was a vicious assault. This case is overcharged. It never should have been charged as second-degree murder. This woman down in Special Prosecutor Angela Corey, as I've said before, her press conference was an embarrassment, and her charging documents are even more of an embarrassment. This is not a second-degree murder case. At most, it's a manslaughter case. But that said, the stuff released the other day, I think, helps George Zimmerman very much.
But you were sort of the early belief that he should have been charged. You just think he's been overcharged?
Well, my position is, let me talk like a liberal for a moment, okay, Brian? My position was nuanced. The question at the time we discussed it was, should he have been arrested that night?
Right.
And the answer is yes. In fact, if he had been, none of this nonsense would have occurred. He would have been charged with something, perhaps manslaughter, perhaps something else. The question now is, has he been overcharged? The answer is yes. Can the government make its case? The only way the government is going to make a case against Zimmerman for second-degree murder is by completely appealing to emotion, which they have done from day one. And the notion in the charging documents, as they put it, that George Zimmerman profiled Trayvon Martin is ludicrous. You can agree with both sides of this argument that something should have been done that night that wasn't, and then be at the position where I am now, which is the prosecution is overcharged. God only knows what a jury is going to do in this case.
Does it make a difference who started the fight?
It certainly does.
Okay, so that's one angle that there could be charges against George Zimmerman if it's somehow proven that he was the first one to throw a punch or to make contact.
I don't know how you're going to prove that.
I know.
Because the evidence that exists now is that no one saw the beginning of the fight.
Right.
And so you're left with Zimmerman's statement, which is that he didn't start the fight. He got out of the car, which he never should have done. He then was walking back to his car when he was attacked by Trayvon Martin. At that point, he does have the right to defend himself, and he may very well have done so, and it appears that he did from all the evidence that we now have. Whether or not the justification for the use of deadly force exists is, again, that's a jury question. But to me, right now, looking at the evidence, it's in favor of Zimmerman.
All right. So John Edwards' trial in North Carolina is coming. It's come to a close, and now they're starting the deliberations. And you and I have sort of been of the opinion there may not be enough there. What do you think now?
I don't think there's been a crime committed. I never have. I think this is not a criminal case. Whatever you may think of John Edwards, who is clearly a dirtball of the first order, this is not a case that should have been a criminal case. The jury may very well convict out of anger, but I still do not believe that there is legally sufficient evidence beyond a reasonable doubt that this was an unreported campaign contribution, which is what the charge is here. The charge is that he knowingly did not report over $1 million in campaign contributions. You know, I don't like John Edwards personally. I've never liked the guy. But you don't charge somebody criminally. And I know how offensive his conduct is. But I just don't see a crime. I see bad behavior. I see the kind of behavior that leads somebody like him not to get the nomination of his party, which he didn't. But I do not see a crime. They may very well convict him out of passion. But, you know, the jurors may be smarter than the prosecutors in this case. I thought the defense put on a good case. They asked all the right questions, and they left it with the jury exactly the way they should have, which is he's a sinner, but he's not a criminal. And I agree with that. I just don't think this is a crime.
There was some talk about putting Ray L. Hunter or John Edwards or John Edwards' daughter on the stand, and that evaporated. You think that was the right move?
Well, I think they were afraid that John Edwards' daughter was going to wear even a shorter skirt the day she testified. I mean, talk about somebody who doesn't know how to dress. I think that they made a decision that hearing her whine about her father would not be helpful, and certainly Ray L. Hunter obviously is a total fruitcake. Putting her on the witness stand was a riverboat gamble of the first order. Nobody wanted her on the witness stand.
Would you then agree also, I mean, this is just an allegation from Ed Klein's book about President Obama, that someone close to President Obama offered Reverend Wright $150,000 to kind of go away for a couple of months. If that that actually was true, there would be no legal problems with that.
None whatsoever. It's perfectly proper. I mean, you know, Reverend Wright was not part of the campaign. He was a private citizen, a mouthy private citizen, but there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, if the campaign had offered the money, that would have been a different issue. I'm not sure it's illegal, even if the campaign had offered him money to shut up. I would like to see some law on that. But, I mean, first of all, I have no doubt that it happened. Mm-hmm. Reverend Wright may be a lot of things, but he doesn't make up stuff like this. And if you've listened to tapes of Klein's interviews, it's fascinating, absolutely fascinating.
It really is, yeah.
I mean, it was riveting. It's some of the most interesting political stuff I've ever heard before. And I'm absolutely certain that it happened. I want to know more about the person that made the offer. I'd like to find that out. I'd like to see those emails that Reverend Wright has saved in a beautiful little book.
A little box, yeah.
Oh, my God, that's going to be quite a bestseller, won't it be?
Yeah. All right, Joe. Good to talk to you as always.